You won't believe what happened on a single night in Lake City, South Carolina, a night that ended in screams, blood, and a fire that would consume an entire family. A group of angry white men surrounded the home of Frazier B. Baker, a black postmaster, and began shooting into the windows. Inside were Baker, his wife Lavinia, and their children, terrified and helpless. Bullets shattered the quiet night, and flames began to devour the house. Little Julia Baker, only 2 years old, was struck as her mother clutched her, desperately trying to protect her. Her father was killed moments later. The night was meant to terrorize, to punish, and to erase a family simply because of the color of their skin, and most of the world would forget them. But the story did not end there. From the ashes and blood, questions lingered. How did it come to this? Why did such violence erupt? And why would history almost sweep these victims into silence? Those questions pulled back through time, uncovering the horrifying truth not only about that night, but about countless forgotten crimes across the 1890s. In the late 1990s, America was a land of change and conflict. Reconstruction after the Civil War had ended, and Black Americans were striving for citizenship and equality. Many had gained the right to vote and held positions of authority in their communities, but white supremacy pushed back violently. Those in power spread fear and hatred, and violence became a tool to punish and intimidate. The most brutal acts of this era were not random. They were strategic, designed to strip people of dignity, property, safety, and life. One of the darkest events took place in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. Wilmington had been a thriving, integrated city where Black citizens worked, owned businesses, and held office. In November, a white mob of thousands marched through the streets with guns, burning Black-owned businesses and forcing elected Black officials to resign. Dozens of residents were shot and killed as the mob seized control, turning a hopeful city into a place of terror. This was no ordinary riot. It was a violent coup, the only successful one in U.S. history. Innocent men, women, and children were slaughtered simply for wanting peace and equality. Despite the scale of the violence, the world largely turned away. Newspapers often blamed the Black community, while the leaders of the attack went unpunished and continued prominent lives. Families lost homes, businesses, and futures, while the names of those killed faded from public memory. Even before Wilmington, in 1897, Chicago witnessed one of the most shocking crimes of the decade. A wealthy businessman named Adolph Lutgert was accused of murdering his own wife, Louisa, and disposing of her body in a large sausage vat at his factory. Rumors spread that he had dissolved her remains in lye and possibly sold the meat to unsuspecting customers. The gruesome case fascinated and horrified the public. Eventually, Lutgert was sentenced to life in prison, but the memory of Louisa's disappearance and the horror of the crime remained a chilling reminder of brutality lurking in ordinary places. These acts, each brutal in their own way, were part of a broader pattern of violence and discrimination that stretched across towns and states in the 1890s, leaving countless victims forgotten.
Yet even as these stories sank into old records and fading headlines, another event would soon occur. A moment so shocking it would force the world to confront the cruel reality of the era. It was a morning that should have been ordinary, but it turned into a scene of unimaginable terror. In Wilmington, North Carolina, thousands of men armed with guns, clubs, and torches marched through the streets, their faces twisted with anger and hatred. Black families ran for their lives as windows shattered, businesses burned, and bullets tore through the air. Mothers clutched their children, men tried to hide their faces, and the streets were filled with screams. No one was safe. This was not just a riot, this was a carefully orchestrated attack, a violent coup that would leave dozens dead and change the city forever. To understand why this happened, we have to go back a little further. After the Civil War, Wilmington had become a beacon of hope, Black citizens held public office, owned businesses, and lived with dignity in a city where they could prosper. But white supremacists saw their power slipping and grew fearful. Political campaigns spread lies, newspapers printed fear-mongering stories, and resentment boiled over into violence. By November 1898, tension had reached its breaking point. The white mob wanted to reclaim control at any cost, and they didn't care who they hurt to get it. On that fateful day, the mob stormed the city. Black-owned businesses were burned to the ground, homes were ransacked, and innocent citizens were killed in cold blood. Men were dragged from their houses and shot in the streets. Families were torn apart, children orphaned, and survivors forced to flee. The violence was swift, brutal, and shocking in its cruelty. The city that had once thrived became a place of fear and despair overnight. One of the most harrowing stories from that day involves a man named Alfred Moore. Moore was a respected black businessman who had worked hard to build his life in Wilmington. When the mob arrived at his home, he tried to reason with them, but words could not stop the rage. They dragged him outside, shot him in front of his family, and left the bodies to intimidate others. Alfred's story was just one of many, but it symbolized the sheer injustice and terror of that event. As the smoke cleared, Wilmington was unrecognizable. Streets were charred, buildings were destroyed, and the city's leadership had been violently overthrown. Hundreds of people had been injured or killed, and countless others forced to flee. Yet the national media largely ignored the massacre, and those responsible faced little to no consequences. Justice, it seemed, had abandoned Wilmington. And Wilmington was not alone. Across the country in the 1890s, similar stories unfolded, victims of violence forgotten by history. In Chicago, the case of Adolf Lutgert haunted the city. The so-called Sausage King had killed his wife Louisa, hiding her remains in a factory vat. The gruesome details horrified the public and revealed how cruelty and murder could hide behind wealth and respectability. Even after Lutgert's conviction, whispers about the crime lingered, a dark reminder that evil often leaves its mark long after the headlines fade. The 1890s were filled with these brutal acts, each one more shocking than the last. Innocent families were torn apart by hate, greed, and vengeance. Communities lived in fear, knowing that at any moment their lives could be destroyed by forces beyond their control. Yet most of these stories were forgotten, buried in history, until now.
But even as history seemed to turn its back, a shocking twist was about to occur, one that would bring attention to these forgotten victims and force the world to remember them. A new crime was unfolding in a small town, one that combined greed, deceit, and unspeakable violence. It would capture the imagination of the public and leave a mark that could not be ignored. The air in Chicago was thick with smoke, fear, and rumors. Inside the Lutgert sausage factory, a horrifying secret had been kept behind locked doors. Adolf Lutgert, once a respected businessman, had committed a crime so vile it stunned the city. His wife, Louisa, had vanished without a trace, and whispers spread that he had lured her into the factory basement, killed her, and then disposed of her body in one of the massive sausage vats. The thought alone sent shivers down the spines of anyone who heard it. It was April 1997 when the police finally confronted Lutgert. The factory smelled strange, a mix of chemicals, meat, and something darker that no one could identify. Neighbors had reported odd noises, and Louisa's disappearance had become impossible to ignore. When authorities investigated, they found evidence that confirmed their worst fears. Inside the vat, traces of human remains were discovered, dissolved beyond recognition. The scene was gruesome beyond imagination. People who had thought the worst in their city had now realized just how far someone could go for greed, obsession, and anger. Lutgert's trial became the event of the decade. Newspapers published daily updates, drawing enormous crowds to the courtroom. People were horrified, fascinated, and captivated all at once. They listened as chilling testimonies painted a picture of a man consumed by jealousy and rage, willing to commit murder to control and possess. The evidence was damning, and the witnesses' accounts left no room for doubt. Every detail of the crime, from the planning to the disposal of Luis's body, seemed more twisted and horrifying than the last. Meanwhile, the city outside struggled with its own fears. The stories of lynchings in the South and violent uprisings in towns like Wilmington had made headlines, and now Chicago faced a crime that was both intimate and terrifying. People began locking their doors, watching their neighbors with suspicion, and wondering if evil lurked in places they thought were safe. The realization spread that violence could strike anywhere, even in the heart of a bustling modern city. Lutgert was eventually found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, but the horror of his crime left a lasting mark on Chicago. Luis's memory haunted the city, and the factory itself became a symbol of how greed and cruelty could hide behind respectable appearances. The story shocked the nation and became a chilling reminder that some crimes are so brutal, their victims are often forgotten until someone dares to tell their story. Even beyond Chicago, the 1890s had been filled with crimes that went unpunished or unnoticed. Families were destroyed by mobs, entire communities terrorized, and countless lives lost. The victims of these brutal acts, like the bakers in Lake City and the citizens of Wilmington, were often erased from the history books, their suffering ignored by a society unwilling to face its own failings. But history cannot fully bury the truth. By looking closely at these forgotten crimes, we see the pattern of human cruelty, injustice, and resilience. We remember the victims who suffered, whose voices were silenced, and whose stories demand to be told. Each murder, each act of violence, and each act of hatred was a piece of a larger picture, one that shows both the darkest depths of human nature and the importance of never forgetting those who were lost. As the 1890s came to a close, the nation faced the consequences of ignoring these brutal crimes. Communities struggled to rebuild, families mourned, and survivors carried scars that would never heal. But by recounting their stories now, we honor their memory and confront the truth. These were not random tragedies. They were deliberate acts of cruelty, born from fear, greed, and hatred, and they shaped the America that followed. The question remains, how many more victims were lost to history, their stories untold, their suffering ignored? And how many lessons from the horrors of the 1890s are still waiting for us to understand them today?